The brother who destroyed my family 4 years ago finally came home. He abused me and my ex until my father came. Ethan had always been a man of quiet ambitions. At 32, he had built a stable, predictable life, a life he cherished. As a software developer, his days were filled with writing clean lines of code, debugging systems, and finding satisfaction in logical precision. His home was modest but comfortable, a two-bedroom house with a small but well-kept backyard. It was not extravagant, but it was his, and he took pride in it. He shared this space with Rachel, his wife of 5 years, and their beloved Maine Coon cat, Snowball. The cat had been Rachel's gift to him on their first anniversary, a symbol of her love, her way of ensuring that even in her absence, he'd have company. Rachel, at 30, was a kindergarten teacher, a job she adored, though it left her perpetually exhausted. She had a heart full of patience, the kind required to manage a classroom full of 5-year-olds, and a warmth that had made Ethan fall in love with her instantly. Their life together was simple, unremarkable to outsiders, but deeply fulfilling to Ethan. They had routines. Sunday morning pancakes, Friday night movie marathons, and lazy evenings curled up on the couch with Snowball nestled between them. They didn't need more. They didn't crave more. But Nathan did. Nathan was Ethan's older brother by 3 years, and in many ways, his complete opposite. Where Ethan was reserved, Nathan was loud. Where Ethan was content, Nathan was restless. Where Ethan found satisfaction in stability, Nathan lived for the thrill of excess. As an investment banker, Nathan earned an impressive salary, drove an expensive car, and never missed a chance to remind Ethan just how different their lives were. To Nathan, Ethan's life was small, suffocatingly ordinary, a puzzle he could never understand. "You're wasting your potential," Nathan would say, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand at family gatherings. "I don't get it, Ethan. You're smart, you're talented, and yet you choose to rot away in some mid-tier coding job, living in that tiny house, playing house with a cat. Don't you want more?" Ethan had learned, over time, not to respond. There was no arguing with Nathan, no convincing him that not everyone needed to chase wealth and status to feel whole. Still, Nathan pushed. "Rachel must be bored out of her mind," he'd continue, smirking. "Come on, a teacher's salary? A husband who works from home half the time? She must be dreaming of something better." It was a jab meant to wound, and Ethan felt it. But he swallowed the retort, as he always did. He told himself it didn't matter. Nathan's opinions had no bearing on his marriage, on Rachel's happiness. And yet, the words lingered, gnawed at him late at night when he lay in bed beside Rachel, listening to the rhythmic sound of her breathing. Nathan had always been like this. Growing up, he had been the golden boy, the star athlete, the one who charmed teachers and broke rules without consequence. Ethan, in contrast, had been the quiet child, the one who preferred books to socializing, the one who Nathan took pleasure in humiliating. It had started in childhood, with Nathan teasing him for his interests, for his preference for video games over sports, for his inability to stand up for himself. As they grew older, the teasing had evolved into something sharper, more deliberate. Nathan didn't just criticize Ethan's choices. He reveled in making him feel small. Family gatherings were the worst. Nathan would arrive in his tailored suits, his watch gleaming under the dining room lights, and immediately take center stage. He had stories of high-stakes deals, of weekends spent in luxury hotels, of the kind of life that left relatives wide-eyed with admiration. And then, inevitably, the conversation would shift. "So, Ethan," Nathan would say, voice dripping with condescension, "still fixing other people's bugs for a living?" Ethan would force a smile, nod, keep his response brief. He knew better than to engage. Nathan wasn't done. Must be nice though. No real stress, no real pressure. Just coasting. Coasting. As if Ethan's career, his carefully built life, was nothing more than a passive existence, a failure to strive for something greater. And then there were the comments about Rachel. "You know," Nathan would muse, leaning back in his chair, "I always thought Rachel was too good for you. She's got that whole sweet, caring thing going on. You're just," he'd gesture vaguely, as if searching for the right word. "There." Ethan's jaw would clench, but he'd stay silent. What was the point in arguing? Nathan thrived on provoking him, on picking at wounds Ethan tried to pretend weren't there. Rachel, bless her, tried to brush it off. "Your brother is just like that," she'd say later, rubbing his arm in comfort. "He doesn't mean half of what he says." But Ethan knew better. Nathan meant every word. The worst part was that Nathan wasn't completely wrong. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, when Ethan wondered if Rachel deserved more. Not in the way Nathan meant, not in terms of wealth or status, but in experience. She had married him young, settled into a life of stability, of predictability. Did she ever wish for something else? Something more? He never asked. He wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Nathan, however, never let the thought rest. "Tell me, Ethan," he said once at a family barbecue. "What do you even talk about with Rachel? Lesson plans? The best way to clean up after a bunch of screaming kids?" Laughter rippled through the relatives gathered around, and Ethan forced a smile, pretending not to care. "You should bring her out with me sometime," Nathan continued. "Let her see what life could be like. You'd be surprised what people realize they've been missing." That was Nathan's favorite game, planting doubts, needling insecurities, and then watching as they festered. Ethan hated that it worked. Still, he held on to the belief that Rachel was happy. That their life, their quiet little life, was enough. But Nathan's voice was always there, whispering in the back of his mind. "You really think she'll be content with this forever?" Ethan never answered. He wasn't sure he wanted to. Nathan had a habit of showing up unannounced. It started gradually, just the occasional visit when Ethan was working late, a casual excuse about being in the area and deciding to drop by. Ethan didn't think much of it at first. Nathan had never been one for boundaries, and as much as he resented his brother's arrogance, he chalked it up to Nathan simply being Nathan. But then the visits became more frequent. Rachel didn't seem to mind. If anything, she welcomed him. "He's just being friendly," she said one evening when Ethan finally voiced his irritation. "I know he teases you, but he's not as bad as you make him out to be." Ethan stared at her, something uneasy twisting in his gut. "You do remember who we're talking about, right? Nathan doesn't do anything without a reason." Rachel sighed, rolling her eyes. "You always assume the worst about him." "Because I know him," Ethan wanted to say. "Because I've spent my entire life dealing with him. Because he enjoys tearing me down." But he let it go. He didn't want to argue with Rachel. She was kind, maybe too kind. She always saw the best in people, even when there wasn't much good to find. So Ethan kept his frustrations to himself, even as Nathan's visits became routine. He'd show up in the evening, always when Ethan wasn't home, always with some excuse that didn't quite add up. He'd bring wine, saying he just happened to have an extra bottle. He'd bring takeout, claiming he'd ordered too much. He'd bring gifts for Snowball, as if the cat needed another reason to adore him. Ethan found out by accident one night when he got home earlier than usual. He walked in to find Nathan and Rachel laughing over a bottle of wine, Rachel curled up on the couch, completely at ease. Snowball was perched in Nathan's lap, purring contentedly. Nathan barely glanced at Ethan. "Oh hey. You're home early." Ethan stood frozen for a second before setting his bag down with more force than necessary. "Apparently." Rachel, oblivious to the tension, smiled at him. Nathan brought over some Merlot. "It's actually really good. Want a glass?" Ethan looked at Nathan, who was smirking just slightly, as if daring him to say something. "No," Ethan said shortly. "I'll pass." Nathan shrugged, swirling the wine in his glass. "Suit yourself." Ethan tried to ignore the tightness in his chest as he went to the kitchen. He told himself it didn't mean anything. Rachel was just being polite and Nathan was just Nathan. But the unease stayed with him. It wasn't just the visits. It was the way Nathan always ended up next to Rachel at family gatherings. At dinners, at barbecues, at holiday events. It didn't matter where they were, Nathan always found a way to position himself beside her. Ethan noticed, but he told himself it was nothing. Nathan was loud, confident, the center of attention. Rachel was warm, approachable, easy to talk to. It made sense that she wouldn't push him away. Still, it grated on him. At Thanksgiving, Ethan watched as Nathan leaned in close to Rachel, whispering something that made her laugh. Ethan clenched his jaw. He reached for his wine glass, gripping it tightly as Nathan draped an arm over the back of Rachel's chair. It wasn't touching her, technically, but the implication was there. It was casual, effortless, as if he had every right to take up space beside her. Rachel didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she didn't care. Ethan did. And Nathan knew it. "Relax, little brother," Nathan said later that night, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You look tense." Ethan shrugged him off. "Maybe I don't appreciate you acting like you own my house." Nathan laughed, the sound low and mocking. "Oh, come on. I'm just being friendly. That's not what this is." Nathan's smirk widened. "Careful, Ethan. You sound paranoid." Ethan took a slow breath, trying to push down the growing anger inside him. He had spent his entire life playing Nathan's games. He knew how this worked. Nathan would push and push, just enough to make Ethan react, just enough to make him look like the irrational one. And if Ethan called him out, he'd only look insecure, jealous, weak. So Ethan said nothing. But Nathan wasn't done. As the weeks passed, Ethan started noticing little things that sent his stomach twisting into knots. Nathan's name would come up in conversation more often. Rachel would mention something he had said, something he had done, and each time, Ethan's irritation deepened. One night, as they lay in bed, Rachel brought it up again. "You know, Nathan isn't as bad as you think." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You've said that before." "Well, maybe you should actually listen." She turned to face him, propping herself up on one elbow. "I get that he can be a lot. But he's not cruel." Ethan exhaled slowly, staring at the ceiling. "You don't know him like I do." Rachel sighed. "Maybe I just don't have a reason to see him that way." That stung more than it should have. Nathan's words echoed in his head. "You sound paranoid." Ethan wanted to believe that's all it was. He wanted to believe he was overreacting. But the feeling wouldn't go away. And neither would Nathan. Ethan had been looking forward to this night all week. Things had been tense lately, Nathan's constant presence, Rachel's growing defenses of him, but tonight was meant to be different. A reset. A reminder of the life they had built together. Their monthly date night had been a tradition since their first anniversary, something Ethan cherished. No work talk, no distractions. Just the two of them reconnecting. He had even bought flowers, a simple bouquet of white lilies, Rachel's favorite. In the small gift bag was a delicate silver bracelet he had picked out a week ago, something understated but elegant, something he thought she would love. As he walked into their favorite Italian restaurant, a cozy little place they had frequented for years, his heart was lighter than it had been in weeks. He scanned the tables, expecting to find Rachel waiting for him with her usual warm smile. Instead, he saw them, Rachel and Nathan, sitting together at a dimly lit corner table, their hands entwined across the white tablecloth. Rachel was laughing at something Nathan had said, her eyes bright, her shoulders relaxed. The kind of laughter Ethan hadn't heard from her in a long time. The kind of laughter she used to reserve for him. For a moment, Ethan froze. His brain refused to make sense of what he was seeing. The flowers in his hands suddenly felt ridiculous, the gift bag heavy and meaningless. His fingers tightened around them as the air around him seemed to thin. Nathan was the first to notice him. Smirking. The same smug, knowing smirk Ethan had grown up with, the same smirk that had taunted him for years, except this time it wasn't over some petty childhood game or a jab at Ethan's career. This time it was over her. "Took you long enough to figure it out," Nathan said, his voice casual, almost amused. Rachel didn't even flinch. She didn't pull her hand away, didn't stammer out an excuse, didn't even look guilty. She just sat there, watching him. Ethan's world tilted. The humiliation hit him like a fist to the stomach. He wanted her to deny it, to laugh and shake her head and tell him this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But she didn't. She just sat there in silence, as if she had already made peace with what she had done. The realization burned through him. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a drunken slip-up or a moment of weakness. This had been going on. For weeks, months, maybe longer. And Nathan had been waiting for this moment. Ethan could see it in his eyes, the satisfaction, the triumph. The sheer enjoyment of watching Ethan stand there like a fool, holding flowers for a woman who had already replaced him. The gift bag slipped from Ethan's fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Rachel glanced down at it, but she didn't move. Ethan's hands curled into fists, his pulse roaring in his ears. The restaurant around them was quiet, the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses a cruel backdrop to his unraveling. Nathan leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "You gonna say something, little brother?" Ethan didn't think. He reached for their wine bottle and knocked it over with a sharp, deliberate shove. The deep red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth, spreading between them like an open wound. Rachel finally reacted. She jerked her hand back, but it was too late. The wine had already soaked into the sleeve of her dress, staining it like blood. Nathan just laughed. Ethan couldn't breathe. He turned on his heel and stormed out, shoving past waiters, past confused diners, past everything that had once felt safe. As he stepped out into the cold night air, the truth settled over him like a weight he could never lift. Nathan had won. And Rachel had let him. Rachel wasted no time. The very night Ethan walked out of that restaurant, she packed her things and moved in with Nathan. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just gone. As if 5 years of marriage meant nothing, as if Ethan had never been part of her life at all. The house they had built together, the routines they had shared, the quiet happiness that once existed between them, it all unraveled in an instant. Ethan hadn't even had time to process it before she came back. Not to apologize. Not to explain. She came for Snowball. Ethan had barely slept when he heard the knock on his door the next morning. He opened it to find Rachel standing there, arms crossed, a forced patience in her expression. "I'm here for Snowball," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan blinked. "You're what?" Rachel sighed, as if he was the unreasonable one. "She was a gift from me. It only makes sense that I take her." Ethan let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're serious?" She didn't flinch. Didn't waver. Ethan felt his grip tighten on the doorframe. "You didn't even ask about me. You didn't call, you didn't text, but you show up for the cat." Rachel shrugged, brushing past him, stepping into their home, his home now, as if she still belonged there. Snowball was curled up on the couch, oblivious to the storm raging around her. Rachel bent down, reaching out to pick her up. "Come here, baby." "Leave," Ethan said sharply. Rachel didn't even look at him. "She's mine." But before she could scoop Snowball into her arms, a voice interrupted. "I don't think so." Ethan turned to see their neighbor, Mrs. Pearson, standing in the doorway. She was in her 60s, no nonsense, the kind of woman who saw everything happening on their street. Rachel straightened. "Excuse me." Mrs. Pearson didn't back down. "Snowball belongs here. This is her home. And if you think I won't call the police on a woman trying to steal a cat, you're dead wrong." Rachel's lips parted slightly, but for the first time, she looked uncertain. Ethan crossed his arms. "You heard her." Rachel's jaw tightened, but she took a step back. She looked at Ethan then, as if seeing him for the first time in years. "You're pathetic." Ethan didn't react. He simply reached down, ran a hand over Snowball's soft fur and said, "Go home, Rachel. You're home." Rachel hesitated for a fraction of a second before turning on her heel and walking out. But Nathan? Nathan didn't leave Ethan alone. The calls started almost immediately. "Man, you should have seen her last night." Nathan's voice oozed through the speaker when Ethan finally picked up on the third day. "She's happier than I've ever seen her. Guess she needed a real man, huh?" Ethan clenched his jaw. Nathan chuckled. "I mean, come on. Did you really think you could keep a woman like Rachel? A guy like you? You sit at home all day writing code while real men go out and make something of themselves." She deserved ambition. She deserved a man with drive. Ethan hung up. It didn't stop Nathan from calling again. And again. Sometimes it was just silence on the other end, followed by a soft, smug laugh before the line went dead. Sometimes it was messages. "Does it bother you that she calls me baby now? Hope you're enjoying your lonely little house, loser. Man, Snowball would have loved it here. Too bad you had to throw a fit." Ethan never responded. Their family shattered. Their mother, always quick to overlook Nathan's cruelty, defended him. "Ethan, honey, relationships are complicated. Maybe Rachel just needed something different." "Stop," Ethan said coldly. "Just stop." She huffed. "I just don't understand why you have to make this a whole thing. Nathan didn't steal her. If she left, maybe you should ask yourself why." Ethan bit down so hard on his tongue that he tasted blood. But Olivia, his sister, she saw it for what it was. "Mom, are you serious?" she snapped over the phone one night. "Nathan did steal her. He chased her. You think this just happened? He's been after Rachel for months." "Olivia." "No," Olivia interrupted. "I'm done. I don't want anything to do with him." And she meant it. Nathan had always had a talent for getting away with things, for twisting the truth until people either forgave him or excused him. But not this time. Not with Olivia. She didn't just cut him off, she cut their mother off too. "If you're going to defend him," she told her coldly, "don't expect me to be part of this family anymore." Nathan didn't care. He had won. And he was determined to make sure Ethan knew it. The divorce was hell. Rachel fought for everything. She wanted half of Ethan's savings. His car. Even Snowball, again. "She was part of my life too," she told the judge, voice sickeningly sweet. "I think it's only fair." The judge cut her off. "Fair? Fair was not leaving your husband for his brother and trying to take the cat." The ruling came down swift and decisive. Ethan kept his house, his savings, his car, his dignity. And when it was over, when the ink had dried on the divorce papers and Rachel had walked out of that courtroom with nothing, Nathan called him one last time. "She still wins, you know," he murmured. "Because she's with me." Ethan didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Because for the first time in his life, he realized something. Nathan needed to win. And that meant, in some twisted way, Nathan was still afraid of losing. Nathan and Rachel wasted no time rubbing their so-called victory in Ethan's face. The divorce papers were barely signed when they began parading their true love for the world to see. Rachel, who once claimed she didn't care about money, was now basking in the very wealth Nathan had always flaunted. Their social media pages became an endless reel of luxury, private beaches, 5-star resorts, champagne dinners, designer shopping sprees. Ethan didn't follow them, but Olivia did. And she made sure Ethan knew exactly what they were doing. "Look at this," she fumed, shoving her phone in front of him one afternoon. Ethan barely glanced at the screen, but he didn't have to. He already knew what he'd see. Rachel, wrapped around Nathan on a yacht somewhere, holding a glass of champagne, her caption dripping with mockery. "Finally with a man who knows how to treat me." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I don't care." "Bullshit," Olivia snapped. "They're doing this on purpose." Of course they were. Nathan's whole existence revolved around proving he was better. That he had won. But Ethan had stopped reacting, and that only made Nathan more desperate. Then came the real consequences. Their father had never paid much attention to Nathan's excesses. He had always turned a blind eye, assuming his eldest son's reckless spending was just part of being successful. But even he couldn't ignore it when the withdrawals started getting bigger. The red flags started with small inconsistencies. At first, their father thought maybe there was a clerical error. Maybe the numbers weren't adding up because of an overlooked expense. But the deeper he dug, the worse it got. Then he noticed something else. The missing money wasn't recent. Nathan had been bleeding the company dry for years. A full audit was ordered. And that's when the real betrayal surfaced. Nathan hadn't just stolen from the business. He had stolen from their late mother's medical fund. Hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for her care, gone. Ethan could still remember those years. Their mother had been sick, and the medical bills had been crushing. Their father had shouldered most of the cost, but the fund was meant to be a safety net, ensuring she had the best care possible. Nathan had taken it, used it for expensive watches, lavish vacations, gifts for Rachel, and their own mother, had gone without. Ethan didn't think he could hate Nathan more than he already did. But he had been wrong. The confrontation happened at their father's office. Nathan, arrogant as ever, waltzed in like nothing was wrong. He leaned back in the chair, smug, unconcerned, even as his father threw the audit results on the desk between them. "Explain this," their father said, voice dangerously quiet. Nathan barely glanced at the papers. "You know how business works, Dad. Sometimes money moves around. You stole from your own mother." Nathan's smirk faltered for the first time. Their father's voice shook with barely contained rage. "She needed that money, Nathan. We all made sacrifices to take care of her. But you were too busy living like a goddamn king." Nathan scoffed. "She was going to die anyway." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. Even Olivia, who had come to witness the fallout, visibly recoiled. Their father, for the first time in his life, looked at Nathan like he was a stranger. Nathan shifted in his seat, as if realizing, too late, that he had gone too far. But there was no fixing this. Their father didn't scream. He didn't curse. He simply said, "You're fired." Nathan laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "You can't fire me." Their father met his eyes. "You don't work here anymore. You don't get another dime from this family." Nathan's expression twisted, his confidence cracking. "You're overreacting. You're lucky I don't have you arrested." That got Nathan's attention. He shot a quick glance at Ethan, then Olivia, then back at their father. "You wouldn't try me." For the first time in his life, Nathan had no comeback. And just like that, he wasn't untouchable anymore. Ethan didn't want to go to the family meeting. He knew exactly how it would go. Nathan would be there, arrogant as ever, still convinced he could talk his way out of anything. Rachel would sit beside him, smug and entitled, acting as if none of this concerned her. Their mother, blind, enabling, would still try to defend him. And their father? Their father was the only reason Ethan was even considering showing up. When Ethan finally stepped into the meeting room at their father's office, he wasn't surprised to hear Nathan's voice first. "Well, well," Nathan drawled, leaning back in his chair with an infuriating smirk. "If it isn't our favorite sore loser." Rachel chuckled beside him, arms crossed, radiating fake amusement. "Guess he had nothing better to do." Ethan clenched his jaw but said nothing. He wasn't here for them. Their father sat at the head of the table, his face carved from stone. He didn't waste time. He lifted a thick folder and slammed it down onto the table. The sound echoed through the room, silencing Rachel's laughter. "Enough." Their father's voice was ice-cold. Nathan rolled his eyes. "Come on, Dad. This is ridiculous. Read it." Their father shoved the folder toward him. "Go ahead. Read what you've done." Nathan scoffed but flipped the folder open. As he scanned the documents, the color drained from his face. His fraudulent contracts, his fake invoices, the massive amounts of money funneled into his private account. And the worst of it, proof that he had siphoned funds meant for their mother's cancer treatment. Rachel leaned over, peering at the pages, her smirk vanishing. Their father's voice was low, controlled, and filled with venom. You stole from your own mother. While we were fighting to keep her alive, while we were struggling to pay for her treatments, you were out buying watches and vacations. Nathan's mouth opened, then closed. He had no excuse, no quick remark, no charming lie. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know anything about that. Olivia scoffed. Of course you didn't. You were too busy spending the stolen money to ask where it came from. Rachel stiffened but didn't respond. Then the next bomb dropped. The FBI is involved, their father said bluntly. There's no covering this up. They're investigating everything. And they will find more. Nathan shot up from his chair. You're turning me in? His voice cracked, his usual confidence crumbling. Their father's eyes burned with disgust. You did this to yourself. Nathan turned to Ethan, grasping at anything, any lifeline. You're just going to sit there? Do nothing? Ethan met his brother's eyes. You made your choices. Rachel was the first to break. She saw it now, her lavish lifestyle was built on a foundation that was about to collapse. Nathan wasn't some powerful, untouchable businessman. He was a fraud. And worse, he was a broke fraud. That night, she filed for divorce. Ethan found out when Olivia sent him the court notice. She didn't waste a second, she said, shaking her head. She knows he's going down, and she's jumping ship before it sinks. Ethan had expected it. Rachel never stayed where there was nothing left for her. Days later, the inevitable happened. Nathan was arrested. Ethan didn't go to the hearing. He didn't need to. The headlines were enough. Wealthy investment banker charged with embezzlement and fraud. Family betrayal. Business heir stole from his own mother's cancer fund. It didn't take long for Rachel to vanish from social media. The private jets, the designer bags, the yacht trips, gone. She had no money of her own. No real career. Just a trail of expensive memories funded by stolen cash. Ethan moved on. Months passed, and for the first time in years, his life was quiet. Until the phone call. A number he didn't recognize. A voice he hadn't heard since the arrest. Nathan. Calling from prison. Ethan almost hung up immediately. But something, curiosity maybe, made him stay on the line. Nathan's voice was broken, weak, nothing like the smug arrogance Ethan had grown up with. I screwed up, man, Nathan whispered. I lost everything. Rachel left. Dad won't talk to me. Mom barely even calls. Olivia won't even look at me. Silence. Then a sniffle. A deep, shaky breath. I'm sorry, Ethan. His voice cracked. I should have never. Ethan ended the call. No words. No forgiveness. No second chances. Nathan had spent years tearing him down, stealing from their family, betraying everyone who had ever cared about him. Now, he had nothing. Ethan had everything. He had taken over the family business, the right way. He had rebuilt what Nathan had tried to destroy. And for the first time in his life, he didn't live in his brother's shadow. His new home was everything he had wanted, peaceful, warm, filled with quiet comfort. And Snowball? Snowball was still the true boss of the company.